Welcome to Drinking on the Edge. I am its host. I'm David Fjord. With me here in the Radio Free Rhinecliff studio is its founder and my co-producer, Matty Rosenberg. Today, we are looking at episode 2 on Louisiana rums. You might recall the previous episode on Louisiana rums was all about cocktails, featuring Tony Abou-Ghanem, master mixologist and a few of the state's top distillers, and a barman of note. Joining me here today, my first ever co-host, Drinking on the Edge, we got Matt Pietrich joining us from New Orleans. Welcome, Matt.
Howdy. Pleasure to be here.
We made acquaintance recently during a tour of Louisiana's rum distilleries. Matt has been writing and researching and has his blog, website, Rum Wonk, has been covering agricole-style rums. And he'll explain to us the general concept about that is in just a moment. But that's what we're here to talk about today, Louisiana agricole-style rums. And making those rums, we got 3 esteemed fellows. One is Thomas Solta. Welcome, Thomas, of Sugarfield Spirits.
Hey, thank y'all for having us.
And next to him is Jason Zeno of Porch Jam Distillery there in New Orleans.
Hey, thanks for having me. And I don't know if anyone's ever called me esteemed.
Wear it proudly or sheepishly, however you choose. And lastly, but not leastly, is the president of the Louisiana Distillers Guild, the co-founder of Rouleaison Distillery, Andrew Lofeld, joining us also from New Orleans. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, everyone. I prefer distillers of ill repute, right? I feel like that's more applicable.
That's more our speed.
Yeah, so that sounds fair.
These gents have graciously provided my co-host Matt and I with samples of what we're going to be talking about today. And in as much as I'm a relative novice to this sector of the adult beverage world, Matt's going to have a heavy hand in leading us through this. Matt, can you tell us, please, what is an agricole-style rum in general? And then if you could kind of wrangle it back to what's going on in Louisiana a little bit.
Sure. Most people know that rum fundamentally comes from sugarcane, but that most of the world's rum, something like 90% or more, if we don't count Brazil, something like 90% or more of the world's rum comes from molasses, which is a byproduct of sugar production. So molasses rums are your Bacardis, your Appletons, all those things like that. But it is possible to make rum directly from the cane juice. In fact, it's actually sort of more closer to the source. You can get more terroir from it. You're directly tasting the result of taking freshly cut sugar cane, juicing it, and then immediately fermenting that into a cane wine. And then from that, distilling it. Production-wise, it's very similar to regular rum making, but the key difference is that instead of taking molasses, which may have been made anywhere from around the world, and reconstituting with water, cane juice rums go directly from the cane juice into the fermentation stage. It's known for having a particular, at least the unaged variety in particular, known for having a sort of a distinctive taste. It doesn't taste the same as rum made from molasses. Some people love it. Some people, like I happen to love it. It's not their cup of tea, at least not initially. But the style has traditionally been associated with the French islands, French producers, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Marie-Galante, a Reunion, but they are certainly not the only ones making cane juice rums. The term agricole actually is the French word for agricultural, meaning gets rum from an agricultural process directly related to the sugarcane. And in Europe, it is a protected term. There's very specific requirements for what can be called rum agricole, including it must come from cane juice, but also regions where it's allowed to be called. In the United States, those regulations don't apply. And so amongst the rum nerds, there's often spirited debates about whether a rum from Louisiana or a rum from Hawaii that's made with cane juice can be called a rum agricole. I prefer to use the term agricole style, but legally outside of Europe, outside of the domains where agricoles protect the terms, you can call any cane juice from an agricole or agricole. In terms of what the Louisiana producers are doing, it's exciting for me as a Louisiana native or a resident for 5 years. It's exciting to see the sort of style of rum sort of really take off here. Most people don't know that Louisiana is the United States largest, within the last couple of years now, the largest producer of sugarcane, or grows the most sugarcane, more than Florida now. And historically, where there is sugarcane, there's been rum. And so there's a lot of sugarcane here. And even though there are no sort of like distilleries of the distant past where the distillery was literally adjacent to the sugarcane mill, here we're close enough. And with modern transportation equipment, distillers here, including some of us with us here today, can literally take a tanker truck to the distillery, fill it up with just cane juice, and take it back to the distillery and be making rum with it within hours. That's sort of the brief overview.
That's a great summation. Thank you for that. Is there anything you guys want to add to what Matt had to say about perhaps your experience historically, what agricole styles imply?
Matt made it sound real easy. A big limiting factor is that where you have to be close to the sugarcane is susceptible to spoilage, very, very susceptible to spoilage. So I think that's a lot of reasons why there's great producers around the country that don't do it. So I don't know, I'm not going to speak for the other two guys on here, but we have an opportunity to do it because of our geographical advantage. So that's a lot of the reason why we do it the way we do it. We don't make agricole because I don't use the same equipment as most agricole is made. I don't distill it the way, I don't age it the same way necessarily. I don't really follow those guidelines. I think what we're doing is a little in its infancy. So we have a lot of decisions that we can make to kind of set the precedent for what we're going to do with raw juice, cane rum.
And the three of you do it on different scales and different interests. I understand that, Jason, your rum production is more or less founded upon sugarcane juice made spirit, whereas Andrew's and Thomas it's more variable.
I mean, I think holistically we have different business models, right, guys? Right? Like it is definitely, I mean, we might as well be called Share Me Rum because that is our flagship. That's what we care most about. That's what we do. But a 3-month harvest, it behooved me if I was a better businessman to make other rum or the rest of the year. But we do some other co-packing and other projects for people.
We make all the styles of rum. We do cane juice during the season, and then we do raw cane sugar vodka, and then we also do molasses-based rums the rest of the year. We're more of a generalist on this. I think I probably echo what Zeno said. I don't call it agricole. I respect the traditions of Reunion and Martinique and Guadeloupe. I think our rum is different than that. Zeno and I sit and compare our rums all the time, and we've had each other's stuff. We have very similar processes, but we have very different mills. To me, agricole style rums here are a completely different animal than what's made in Martinique
For the
Guadeloupe.
for the uninitiated listener, can you take us through the step-by-step process and how sugarcane is processed into rum as fresh juice, and also when is this harvest season, by the way?
It always depends on when the cane mills decide that the cane is ripened.
The rouleaison, kind of talking to that season, the rouleaison is the term for the harvest season. Literally, it means the rolling or the rolling time. Roulé, just like roulette wheel or les bon temps roulé. That's that rolling action signified by the gears grinding that sugarcane. With us as producers in this region, we kind of have our own, every region has its own unique issues. And Louisiana has a relatively short season compared to a lot of other places. So that opportunity for producing an agricole style rum is more brief. And that kind of is that you have to weigh your decisions as a producer on whether you want to only produce it during that time, you want to produce other rums outside of that season. But I think we also have that opportunity as having probably one of the most diverse landscapes in terms of those processors, 11 mills throughout the state. Each of them are going to be producing a different type and quality of juice. We have this almost like responsibility to really show consumers what all those differences are.
So the harvest season for Louisiana is the window's generally from September through January. It can with some variance. Is that about right?
This year, this is probably one of the weirder years in Louisiana that we've had in a long time. We had probably the biggest drought that we've had in Louisiana in a very long time. Typically, we get a ton of rain from June to October. It's hurricane season. We fortunately didn't have a hurricane this year, but we also didn't have rain.
If I can interrupt you. So yeah, that issue made international headlines going with the crawfish situation down there. So the world's aware of that.
So I think we had a really great harvest this year. I think all the mills were actually pretty happy with the quality of the sugar that came in. I was really happy with the quality of the juice that came in. The bricks was a little bit lower than typical. Bricks is a measure of sugar in the sugar cane.
How sugar cane is harvested, milled, and then made into juice and then distilled.
Sugar cane is harvested by gigantic combines now. They roll through the field about 4 to 5 rows at a time. They cut it into little itty bitty chunks that are probably a foot wide called billets. They load those into cane carts. And anybody in South Louisiana has been behind a cane truck, trucking those billets to the mill all over the area. There's 11 mills in the state. We all get our juice from different mills. I get my juice primarily from Lula. So we get the sugar cane comes into the mill. It gets crushed. I get mine off with the first press. It is a very muddy, raw product. I'm about 2 miles from the river here at the Mississippi River in Gonzales. I'm 35 minutes from our mill. I go over, they fill up my totes with juice. I get about 1,500 gallons of juice. We pump it in the tank with hydrated yeast almost immediately. And it is fermenting before I leave in the evening. And the ferments are done in about 36 to 42 hours, probably. With a really quick ferment, we do add a little bit of yeast nutrient and a little bit of nitrogen to our ferments.
Do you do any processing? Do you have to filter the juice or do anything juice, or is it literally straight from the tank?
I literally don't do anything to the juice. It has never seen heat. It has never seen, all it saw was pressing on the mill, and it's off the first press, so it hasn't seen lime. It hasn't seen any sort of further
Just
processing.
Water and milk.
If you've ever gone to a restaurant and they use like fresh pressed cane juice, like they have a little like mill roller and they take a stalk of sugar cane and they collect the juice and use it in your cocktail.
For those of you visiting New Orleans cocktail bars, you'll have that opportunity to not find that kind of thing too often elsewhere. So basically what you're saying, Thomas, is that with the constant that you and Jason may have is that you use the same yeast, same enzymes. Your source material is different, and then obviously the equipment you're using is different to distill.
It's a good utilitarian yeast, and we know how it's going to ferment. It's predictable. It's good under stress. It's good in hotter ferments. I think a lot of it, we have a common thread. We're different mills, but different cane from different farms. And I studied fermentation science, and we're all, I would say, microbiology nerds in a certain aspect, right? My 10-cent hypothesis too is a lot of that terroir, if you want to call that, is that microbiological load that comes in not only with the sugarcane, but then the water in the mill and everything in there that's in that area. That our yeast is fermenting, sure, but it's a co-fermentation. There's a lot of things going on.
And this actually sort of brings me up. I want to add, just listening to, like, I've been to your distilleries, I saw what you're doing, but I've not been to Sugarfield yet. But just sort of listening to you talk about how similar your protocols are, and then contrasting that to what Andrew is doing with much longer fermentation. Andrew, can you share sort of like how you're differing from what they're talking about?
And I think a part of it is a bit like a opportunity in terms of being a little bit smaller scale. We're a bit more petite than Sugarfield or Porch Jam. And basically what we're doing here is we kind of skip over. We worked with some of the mill juice, some from Lula in past seasons, but this past year, we actually skipped over the mill and are going directly to the farmers. Everything has its own benefits and downsides, but I'll drive a truck with a small trailer and drive out to one of the farms, and we have different partnerships with different farmers in the state, and we'll get those whole stalks of cane back. And I've got a little tiny micro scale version of the big mills at our facility, and we'll juice it here and go through those in the same vein in terms of it's fermented. But for us, I like to promote that natural microflora, the wild yeast and bacteria that's already native to the sugarcane. So we'll tend to go for more wildly fermented fermentation. We actually saw much higher Brix levels, much higher sugar content in the cane that we were getting from typical. Ours was up at 20, 23, 20.
I think even the samples I actually sent to you and David Matt, was something that I crushed 3 years ago. We hand cut the cane. We crushed it at the distillery, 3 years in a white port barrel. And I love that aspect of it. I've got an ongoing relationship with the LSU Ag Station that's right in my backyard. I think most of what we're getting in Louisiana right now is LSU 299. That's the varietal that grows best in this area and produces a lot of sugar. I think it's good, but I think what's really interesting is that it may not necessarily be the best for rum production.
I think you're touching on is we've seen this. There are, like in the past, there was notions of rum canes that the optimal sugar cane for sugar yield may not be the optimal cane for a full rum. We've been talking about the fermentation and all that kind of stuff. I've been going through enjoying the samples. Is that we've talked about like the rum agricole of Martinique, and it is column distilled, and it has very distinct requirements for it. It has a very distinct flavor profile. If I put an agricole next to one of your rums, I could immediately tell the unaged difference apart. And so I'm sort of interested from all three of your perspective of like, how would you describe, not so much how they're differently, but how would you describe from your perspective, the flavor profiles of your rums versus sort of like the very sort of constrained rum agricole flavor profile? That.
Oh, sure. Okay. So I think the unaged sample I sent you from this year was this year's cane season. Again, 100% from Lula's sugar mill. We got the juice. It was very quickly fermented, and we stripped. We did our first pass distillation over cane season, and then after the cane season was over, we did our finishing runs. I think I love the flavor of mine this year. It was very different than previous years that I've done.
If you were to describe the difference between, say, a classic, say, from St. James unaged agricole blanc versus yours, like how would you, just within a few words, like what would you say the key differences are?
I would say mine's cleaner. I would say, and this is probably a fault I see in myself, where I tend to be a very clean fermenter and a very clean distiller. What I'm seeing in barrel right now may be cleaner than it should be. That's the part that I'm still trying to learn. I need to probably take my cuts a little bit broader, especially for things that are going to be barrel aged. And I think you talked to me the last time I was here that I think maybe I need to be bring my proof down a little bit.
Son, you kind of brought that up, but your background as well is not from the spirits world, Roy, as Andrew's and Jason's are. If you can comment a little bit about how each of your background supported and helped you in one way and maybe detracted from adjusting to rum, or how did it affect that?
So I started out in the tech world. So I did tech for a while, but I had a family best friend who was a fourth generation Italian winemaker. And he is like a dad to me. First thing I ever made was grappa. And then I decided I didn't want to do tech. I wanted to pursue making alcohol and the science of alcohol, but I realized I didn't have a hard science background. So I went to Oregon State University because they had a fermentation science program. From there, I worked at a place where we made Bayou ryegrass, and then we made liqueurs, and then we made ryegrass whiskey. But mainly it was a lab where we worked on different patents, and I learned a lot in a lab. Then I went to Nashville and made whiskey for a little bit. And then I went to Kentucky and worked for a little place called Jim Beam for a few years. And I saw this opportunity in New Orleans, and I thought, rum, that seems like it's underutilized. What do I use? There's all those influences, the tech, every bit of it. The tech, the winemaking, the whiskey making, obviously, is almost a direct correlation. But doing this style of rum is holistically different. The Chermy Blanc, which you should have there, it shouldn't even existed, really. We were just making new make because I'm like, hey, it's U.S. People like brown spirits, even though I most of the time prefer new rum, raw sugarcane, or rums, period. Let's age it. So we made all that new make, is what I call it. I think I give you a little bit of that too. And one of the marketing sales guys, he was like, oh, we should sell a white rum. So we rectified it more. I cleaned it up, distilled it to a higher proof, and something that's a little more approachable. So I'm trying to cast a wider net with Chermy Blanc, as in, Matt, you said what is comparable. I would say it's somewhere between Barbancourt White and rum JM white. Those
Right.
were two benchmarks I used
Okay.
because I wanted less vegetative things like in the rum
Right.
JM, and I wanted, but not quite as clean as Bourbon
Right.
Corp.
Right.
And it's agricole style starter kit. That's what I
Exactly. Yeah. It's sort of like I think of them as like the gentle introduction to an agricole, the cane juice. Some people immediately ducks to water, and other people are like, no, there's something that just like viscerally react to it. Like my wife has been the same way for quite a while now. She's slowly coming around. But Andrew, I think both of them have touched on some of your experience. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So my background, I started out, my direction popped around a little bit. My degree in school had nothing to do with any of this. It was math and computer science, basically. It was actually even more esoteric than that. It was something called logic, information, and computation was the degree program. In the middle of it, I also started having a budding passion on the beer side of things. I became an avid home brewer. So I worked at a few craft beer bars. My intent originally was to get into the brewing side of things, but started getting really interested into the distilling and basically, talking about whiskey. You basically have to make a beer to make a, and that was right as the big craft spirits boom was just starting to really come to a head. And I was able to basically shoehorn my way into working at a distillery up by David's neck of the woods in New York, and spent a few years there making whiskey at a really very cool craft producer, Kings County Distillery. They very cool kind of modern, but also traditional methods with what they're doing over there. And I spent a few years there kind of really honing in on what I wanted to do with my own project, and just became very passionate about caught the rum bug, basically. Love the variety of rum, love how diverse it is in terms of its production, and just really became disheartened with how hard it was to find that variety in the States. And we talked earlier about how much sugarcane Louisiana produces. Louisiana, the state, is a top producer in the world in terms of just quantity. One of the top, I think it's like 15 perhaps. But anyway, we've got this great local resource here, and no one at the time was really making use of it. And so that was what really spurred me to come down here and, produce more of the styles of rum that I really liked, which are, the bigger, bolder, kind of distinctive rums, see out of Jamaica or, those Martinique or Guyana, Barbados.
One of the reasons Bacardi is so popular is tax reasons. Like the Puerto Rican USVI producers, their rum they get tax advantages. They don't pay the same taxes that imported rums come from, or the imported spirits come from. And that in turn is interesting because they have this perception, from my perspective, it's perception that rum should be a cheap, very inexpensive spirit. And we're trying to tell them like, no, they're good ones. They're better rums. So you got to pay more for it. And I feel like that's kind of the hurdle there is they see a bottle of Bacardi for $12 on the shelf, and all rum should be $12. And what is this thing that costs $30 a bottle? So I think that's a little bit of it.
Doesn't hurt the Bacardi bottom line. That's a good amount of their bulk. It gets shipped over from other islands that will remain nameless to help them out there. We've been tasting these while we've been talking too, and Matt and I have already gone through the whites, and what we're finding here is like great expressions that you would not find in Bacardi White. Bacardi White is, when I've done rum tastings, I say, this is the base, what you're going to be tasting here. It's comparable to if you're doing a beer tasting, you're tasting Bud. Bud is a basic standard. Bacardi is a basic standard.
What are some of the misconceptions or inhibitions people have to sort of embracing rums from your perspective?
So I do run a pretty big tasting room, and I think I tailor my notes for agricole to who the person is coming in. If it's somebody that really knows rum, that knows cane juice rum, agricole, reunion, cachaça, as you mentioned earlier, Matt, I think I talk real nerd sort of things. We talk about where my cane juice came from, what the varietal was, what the terroir was. I did a expression 2 years ago where it was the same farmer, same cane varietal, same treatment in the field, and it was grown about a mile apart, but the soil was different. And I crushed the cane 100% here in house, Louisiana 299 sugarcane, Lollyman RM yeast, same distiller me, same treatment in the distillery, and they were drastically different spirits. And I think when a person that's knowledgeable about rum comes in, I talk about that. When a Louisiana native comes in, I talk about the cane season. They're used to driving behind cane trucks. They smell that there's a smell when you're driving behind a cane truck. Maybe it's a little diesel. Maybe it's a little, but there's a smell during cane season in cane crushing country.
And sometimes everybody around in the air from the cane burnings even, so.
100%. Everybody around here knows that smell. And so I talked to him about that. I talked to how this is a 100% Louisiana product. And then there's that novice that comes in that doesn't know anything about rum. And so we talk about how there's all these different styles of rum. If you want to boil your sugar before you make rum out of it, you're going to get a lot of butterscotch and caramel flavor. I think that I've got everything from rum in new charred oak barrels to rum in used bourbon barrels to rum in port barrels, to rum in cognac barrels, to rum in Madeira barrels. And all of those sort of aspects, I talk about the barrel influence, but also the base product too.
I think that is the expectation of the whiskey drinker, is the bourbon drinker in particular, their association with like quality spirit is new American oak. Like they taste that. And I've noticed that when we were on our tour, every place that would be like new American oak.
I love the new American oak flavor that I get, not with my cane juice. I'm never going to put cane juice into new American white oak charred, but some of my molasses rums and new American white oak, it's delicious.
It resonates.
And I'll argue that with you.
Well, no, you can. And Andrew's are great too, because he has his fermentation methods, which are unorthodox at best. Let's just say that, right?
Right.
I think the new American oak drives a lot of those maturation reactions that it's, in a way, a lot of necessary, and even his distillation method, right? The way your distillation setup is innately a heavier spirit.
I call it more fermentation forward.
Being in New Orleans and it being such a big tourist destination, we see everybody under the sun. There's so many people coming in here, and a lot of folks will happen upon us almost just because we're advertised and they want to do something booze related in the city while they're in town.
Right.
And I think that's my favorite folks are the folks that come in with no preconceived notions about what rum is, aside from they drank too much of it in college,
right,
and most likely they don't like it.
And it's probably, isn't it sweet? Exactly. Because we only drank it with Coke before, so of course it's sweet.
It harkens back to talking about how diverse, how much variety there is in the rum world. I just love making connections with people too. What are you interested in? What do you like? And there's going to be a rum for you, whether if you like your brandies or whiskeys or gins or vodkas or tequilas. And sometimes if you talk about it in rum speak, because it's a little bit foreign for some folks, it doesn't make that connection. But especially talking like agricoles, and even just like our normal white rums have kind of some of those same qualities as well. But if you look at it, you talk to them more as a tequila, or that tequila is one of the few white spirits without things, ideally.
Like a white spirit that's not considered inferior because it's not aged in new American oak.
Jason, looking at the two brown rums you've sent, Jason, what do you think we should be tasting first here? The Cherami Aged Gold or the Cane and Table?
Whatever tickles your fancy. So the Cane and Table is a lot higher proof. That's barrel strength. That's undiluted.
Okay, let's start with the Cherami Aged Gold. Is this on the market already?
It is. So actually, in reality, everything that you have is in the market in one way, shape, or form.
Great.
So there's four. I think there's 4 samples there, right?
Correct. I've already tasted through the whites and moving on to the darker ones. This Aged Gold, what's the aging on this one, and what's
So nothing's less than 2 years in that blend. That's a blend of 35 barrels that were hand selected by where they were in the warehouse and what we thought their contribution would be to the overall blend. So we had intent, and we say things. Whenever we start making anything before we do fermentation or yeast selection or substrate or anything, we always think, okay, well, what's the end product? Start with the end in mind. Someone told me that a long time ago. That really rings true. But with this, that's like, right, if we're going to build our portfolio of Cherami rums, the aged gold, it is pretty easy to kind of replicate by blending. I'm learning a lot in blending with rum. I could tell you what I didn't do in whiskey, because whiskey's kind of blended very mathematically. Let's just say that. Where rum blending is, there's a really lot of fun tools you can use. This barrel adds this contribution, that barrel adds this contribution. So the aged gold is 35 barrels, nothing less than 2 years. Ex-bourbon cask. What other finer details are about it? The crazy thing is, the warehouse is actually set up relative humidity and temperature sensors that I log in different areas of the warehouse. So there is a significant difference in the temperature and humidity within the warehouse. It has in both of their facilities. I'm sure they have that too. And I could say that, and things are going to age drastically different, whether it's top towards an outside wall and bottom away from the wall. But you could also have two barrels right next to each other.
Sure, these things can happen everywhere in the distilling world. What's the lowdown on the cane and table bottling?
So the cane and table bottling is, if you haven't been to cane and table when you go to Lee Rolling, you should go to cane and table.
Been twice. Love it.
They're a great rum bar. They are part of a company that we work closely with. They pour a lot of Cherry rums. People, part of their team came in, and owners came in, and they actually, full disclosure, they filled some barrels that we do an annual crawfish boil where we let people fill some barrels. And it's a lot more exciting to fill a barrel when it's not your job. And if you do that, eat crawfish, and they came in and they signed it. And so we tried those, and we were always going to do like a barrel release, a barrel select from them. And they were okay. But I was like, but you guys can have whatever barrels you run. Like, we can pick based on notes. So the cane and table one actually is pretty clever. It's one of the barrels, it was pushing 3 years old, but then we wanted to brighten it up a little bit and get it less away from that American oak flavor and more of the vegetable flavors, things like that. So we had, at one time, I reserved some year-old rum out of first fill. We call it first fill, ex-bourbon casks, right? And I rested in stainless steel for about a year, and I wanted to use it as a blending tool. I put some of that back in second fill barrels when I harvested aged gold, actually. So I had these empty aged gold. So like some of the rum, one of the barrels is like a 3-year-old ex-bourbon cask. The other one was an ex-bourbon cask for 1 year, in stainless steel for 1 year, and was in a ex-Cherry aged gold rum barrel for 4 or 5 months. But it was nice because we like curated this flavor profile just based off of 2 barrels, which is incredibly hard to do. And they wanted the barrels straight at the higher proof, and I quite like it too. I'm actually pretty excited about it. We just bottled that and got it out in the market. I think it's out in the market like this week. So.
And I'm really liking, again, dialing back a little bit, all of your white rums have everything I'm looking for in something that's agricultural style. I want something that's dynamic, explosive on the palate, fresh. A little bit of grassiness and greenness is always welcome. I actually want those edges polished off. I'm looking for something that's a bit more composed. And you've achieved that admirably, both of you so far. We're now on to the final one, because it's the one that's had longest, I believe, aging, and it's certainly the darkest by appearance, and that's Thomas's aged rum here. Thomas, can you run us through that?
What you have in front of y'all is an expression from something we started right before we opened officially to the public. December of 2019, we cut the cane in one of my nurse practitioner's husband's fields. The only reason when we released this spirit clear, we put the coordinates of the field that we cut it in on the bottle. We hand cut the cane, we crushed it at the distillery. We released about 200 bottles of it clear, and then we put a barrel away in a white port barrel. What y'all are tasting is a 3-year-old expression of this, and 3 years in a white port barrel. They're virgin barrels for high proof spirits. They've had a 20% alcohol solution in it, but they've never had a 120% solution. We aged it in this barrel. We're at 9 feet of elevation.
Louisiana is extremely flat if you've never been here.
They may be negative something. I'm above the sea level, but not much. We have 100% humidity a bunch of the year. It's a really high humidity the rest of the year. We never really get super cold, and we never get super hot because of the humidity. 95% humidity and 95 degrees is a lot hotter than 115 degrees and no humidity. We never get cold here because the humidity is so high. There's a lot of nights in the summer where we don't get below 80.
A very quick, nerdy question. What's your typical angel share?
We don't have a lot of angel share, which is weird.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
No, I think our angel share is a lot less than most of the places in,
Caribbean.
if you go to the Caribbean, but also like Austin or New Mexico, which is like this, like all of those places have a much lower angel share than we do in Louisiana. The humidity here plays a gigantic role in what all of our terroirs are. What evaporates from a barrel here is alcohol. It's not water. So our angel share is low, but that just means that we're evaporating alcohol out of our barrels. And my experience here is that the proof continues to fall the whole time.
Right. That's what I expect given our humidity here.
I explain it to people. I call it a barrel is like a semi-permeable membrane. Then you have a concentration gradient. If you take the main two things, it's alcohol and water. If there's more water on the outside, alcohol is going to tend to go that way, which is we live underwater in Louisiana. I lose a lot. Like at the end of the day, if you want to go on a proof gallon basis, but it does the same thing as like when I did whiskey in Kentucky. It's like that first year, the initial year, because everything, your relative volatility, like everything's volatile, right? Everything's breathing in and out quickly. And you lose a lot in that first year and it kind of tapers off.
Right.
And so I actually, on some of my barrels, I actually proof down in barrel too. So I top up with just water.
And I was just going to say the reason, because I'm also a science nerd, but the reason we like to talk about angel share is because the angel share, like you think of it as, people think of it like we're losing, but it's also concentration. You are losing the lighter elements and concentrating the heavier, more flavorful elements that remain behind. So a high angel share is not good for your bottom line necessarily, but it also means that you concentrate, like the flavors that were there to begin with concentrate even faster.
You charge more a bottle. Right?
Yeah, exactly. That's why we obsess about angel share.
I always think of it as you're losing things, you're gaining things, and there's reactions happening. If you're going to put it in 3 buckets like that. And then there's the rate at which all those happen, which is, if we aged our rums in Texas, they would be very different.
They wouldn't be Louisiana rums at that point. That's to be sure. Guys, we're at an hour here. Got to wrap it up. Thank you all for joining Drinking on the Edge. And for those of you listening who want to acquire these, sure, go to Louisiana. Meet the folks there at Roule's on Porch Jam, Cherami, and Sugarfield Spirits. But you might be able to mail order those off to you. Sugarfieldspirits.com, roulezon.com, and is it porch-jam.com? Did I get that right?
It is.
Hey, the hyphen this time. Go online and you can order it with legal limitations applied. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining Drinking on the Edge. Jason Zeno, Andrew Lofeld, Thomas Soltall, and my co-host for this, Matt Pietrek. Keep drinking on the edge.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.